We are now moving into our next session of the day. And this session is about health and productivity through clean air at home and the workplace. The session will be moderated by two distinguished experts. First moderator is Dr. Subramanian. He is head of air quality sector at CSTEP. He holds a PhD in mechanical engineering from Carnegie Mellon University, and his areas of interest include air pollution characterization and source apportionment through measurements and modeling using a variety of research-grade and low-cost instruments and tools. Our second moderator is Mr. Kunal, who is Senior Associate in Climate, Environment, and Sustainability Sector at CSTEP. And his areas of interest include stakeholder engagement, net zero carbon buildings, smart cities, and climate-friendly policymaking. I would like to welcome Dr. Subramanian and Mr. Kunal to the stage. Please give them a warm welcome.
All right, so thank you all for coming to this session. I think it'll be hard to follow up Dr. Rudra. That was a fantastic presentation again, but we'll do our best. And I think we've got a fantastic panel here today where we're basically looking at health and productivity through clean air at home and the workplace. Essentially, I mean, one of the things, while the conference largely focuses on outdoor air pollution, we spend most of our time actually indoors. And there is a strong correlation between outdoor and indoor air pollution, but but how can we actually also reduce sources of pollution indoors, as well as take measures like proactive measures like air filtration, for example, and better practices indoors to reduce indoor air pollution so that we can breathe healthier air indoors and be more productive. There are studies that show that improving air quality indoors actually leads to better productivity overall as well, in addition to human health. Guru Prakash, sorry, you're also there. Please come on stage. And so we have a very fantastic panel here. Of course, my co-moderator, Kunal Jagdale, he's got a background, of course, he's already been introduced, but he's got a background in green buildings, and he's currently part of the climate team at CSTEP. We are also pleased to have, of course, Faye McNeil back again on stage. She's one of the leads of one of the PIs at CAMS-Net, as well as a professor at Columbia University. And Dr. Yash Shukla is online. He is the center head and principal researcher at CARBS. We'll, of course, go through a bit more detailed bio when you come up to give a talk. We also have Mr. Guru Prakash Sastry, who is the associate vice president and head of climate action at Infosys. And we also have Samir Patel, who is an assistant professor at IIT Gandhinagar, and of course Ronak Sutaria, founder and CEO of Respira Living Sciences. So thank you again for agreeing to participate in this session. And the way we're going to do this, I think each of you is going to have about 10 or 15 minutes to give your talk. I forget what we said exactly, but go for it. And it's a 2-hour-long session. And so we have plenty of time for discussion following that. So after each talk, we will have about a quick question for that particular speaker if you need it. And then we'll save the most of the questions and discussion for the end. So thank you again. Kunal, do you want to introduce the first speaker?
Hi. Thank you, Subbu, for the present welcome. We have a list of 5 speakers today. So as Subbu mentioned, there would be 15 minutes time for each speaker. We will take one question after the speaker, a quick question, and then later after 5 people, we'll have a panel discussion. So today's first speaker is Professor Faye McNeil. She is a professor and a vice chair at Department of Chemical and professor in Department of Earth Environment Science in Columbia University. She is current president of American Association for Aerosol Research. She has received various awards such as NSF Career Award, and she is also named currently the Fellow of Royal Society of Chemistry in 2023. We are very glad to have her here. Her topic for today would be clean air for healthy indoor environments. I welcome her.
Okay, thank you so much for that kind introduction. And this work was done with a great many collaborators who are listed here. So this topic is something quite different from what we've heard about so far today. But in reality, as Subbu mentioned, everybody here spends the majority of their lives indoors, right? So Americans spend, I believe it's 80 to 90% of their time indoors. And so therefore, the majority of the air that we breathe is indoor air, and there's a lot of time to be exposed to whatever happens to be there. I would say 20 years ago, the attitude was that indoor air was very similar to outdoor air, but perhaps a little bit more dilute, a little bit cleaner. But I would say research has made it clear, and you know, we can see for ourselves that the indoor environment has some of its own unique risks. So indoor pollutant sources can be very intense. For example, cooking, cleaning, incense, other sources like this. And depending on the characteristics of your space, including ventilation, the emissions can stay in one place for much longer than they might have if the same activity was happening outdoors. Our concern when it comes to health is not just the health impacts of chemical pollutants like the kind that we've been talking about for outdoor air, but also the fact that humans in a space with their exhalations are emitting potentially dangerous pathogens in respiratory aerosols, right? So someone who is ill through singing, speaking, breathing, of course coughing or sneezing, they're emitting small particles which may contain virus or bacteria, which others can breathe in. And this is an additional health risk, which we learned a lot about during the COVID-19 pandemic, unfortunately. The interesting and good news is that just like air pollution and climate have potential co-benefits, there are potential co-benefits when it comes to indoor air, that activities that we might undergo to try to reduce, for example, the spread of disease can also give us a benefit in terms of indoor air quality, in terms of pollutants. Okay. So a few words about ventilation. This is something that we all may have been vaguely familiar with, but began to think a lot more about in 2020, right? Adequate ventilation is needed for healthy indoor spaces, whether we're talking about transmission of disease or pollutants. And when the focus on airborne transmission of COVID-19 emerged, we were presented with recommendations for the level of ventilation that should happen on a room-by-room basis. So we were told the air in a room should be replaced with clean air, either from the outside or filtered air, at least 3 times per hour. So we would say that that corresponds to an air exchange rate of 3 to 6 exchanges per hour or better. And we were presented this information at the very beginning of the pandemic. You know, the professional association ASHRAE that makes these guidelines, they had a number in mind. However, when we all turned to our classrooms, our offices, et cetera, and said, well, do we have that? Do we have adequate ventilation on a room-by-room basis? The answer was usually, we don't know, okay? Usually building managers for a building like this one, which has mechanical ventilation, they have a sense of how much air is brought in total, but not room by room. You know, could there be one room with less ventilation, one with more? This information, unless they're required for a special kind of room like a laboratory or a hospital room, they just didn't have that information. Making matters a little bit worse, if your room, again, if your building is modern and it has mechanical ventilation, you can measure the airflow through the vent. However, many different building types in New York, where I live, we have older buildings which don't have that kind of ventilation. They have radiators for heat, and we open the windows for ventilation. Here in India, of course, many spaces also are like that. They don't have mechanical ventilation. How on earth do you answer this question? Do we have adequate ventilation or not? And so as we were trying to open up after COVID-19 and assess, is it safe or is it not safe, everybody needed support to make these decisions. And this story should sound kind of familiar from what we've been talking about with air quality management outdoors as well, right? Decision makers need support with data from communities like ours to be able to make the right call. Okay, so to give a little story, scientists like myself and many colleagues with similar training to mine, aerosol scientists or atmospheric chemists, we started to help out in our own communities, maybe at our own universities, schools in the neighborhood, churches, et cetera, to see what kind of technical assistance we could offer to answer these questions about whether or not indoor spaces were safe. My colleagues and I were all doing this kind of independently around the US, different states, different climates, different building types. We were even using different approaches. We weren't really conferring with each other because it was an emergency time. We were just doing this as a service. And then we started to realize through Twitter, through other communications, hey, these activities are all kind of happening in parallel. What if we bring our data together and compare what did we learn? What can we gain from understanding these diverse experiences? And so this was published a few years ago in this open access publication shown here. Okay. One of the tools that we used to assess ventilation in one form or another was tracer experiments. So, this is for situations where measuring airflow through a vent isn't possible. It's possible if you're using sensors to observe how a chemical tracer gets removed from a space over time. So my student Do Young, who's shown here, he went around to classrooms in these old buildings across Columbia, released CO2 to a certain concentration, mixed the room well with fans, placed CO2 sensors around the room, and then by observing how the ventilation worked and removed that CO2 from the air, he could calculate the air exchange rate, which is, of course, is the number that we're trying to meet. And then by assessing, is this room, is the air exchange rate high enough, is it not, then we could recommend to the building managers where filters and things like this should be placed. You may have seen these sensors, these same sensors, people who have been carrying them with them into spaces like this one, which are occupied by humans, because we also emit CO2 in our exhalations, right? Not only we are emitting aerosols, we're also emitting CO2. And so another kind of experiment you could do would be to just observe what's happening to the CO2 level as a room fills up, for example, during a class, and then reach a steady state as the emission of ventilation, or emission of CO2 and ventilation of it are balanced. And then as the room clears back out, how that decay happens, you can get similar information from this data. Okay, so I'll just give a few examples to illustrate, the sense that buildings are diverse, right? So even in the US, where these recommendations are coming from, the perspective is very much focused on the more modern buildings. And at Columbia, we found that all of those buildings that had mechanical ventilation that had been built after the 60s or so, the ventilation was fine, okay? Basically, only very few classrooms required some filtration to be installed to be safe. However, the south side of our campus, the buildings were all built in 1894 or so. In New York, buildings are built primarily to keep the heat in the winter, and so therefore, as a rule of thumb, we could say these older buildings do not have great ventilation and they need a little bit of help to get up to that standard. Now, go to a different part of our country, with a very different climate, California. Those buildings, let's go back 40, 50 years, they were built in such a way to capture the breeze and keep cooling affordable. Maybe many buildings here in India are built that way as well. And so therefore, older buildings, in New York, those had worse ventilation. In California, they have excellent ventilation. And then as the trend towards energy efficiency started in the 80s, ventilation was worse. In each case, in this example, ventilation is okay, but we would say, as a rule of thumb, it's opposite in California from New York. And with these kinds of measurements, we were able to answer these kind of granular, practical questions that people needed to be able to answer during this period. If I have a classroom and I have an option to have natural ventilation or to close all the windows and doors and turn on the AC, which one is safer, right? These are the questions that people really need to have answers to. And, in the case of this Santa Barbara high school, we were able to say, yes, leave the windows and doors open, that's better. I think I'll skip this for interest of time. All right, so in the last few minutes, I want to talk about another aspect of indoor air quality. Besides good ventilation and introducing filtration, as I've mentioned, as methods for keeping indoor air safe, germicidal UV has been discussed quite a lot as well, right? So the idea is that you shine UV light, and this kills airborne pathogens. Of course, there are concerns about UV light being safe for humans, and so this short wavelength 222 nanometer light has been proposed as being safer because it doesn't hurt the human eye and it penetrates only very shallowly into the skin. Of course, atmospheric chemists see this and they say, oh my God, I do this on purpose in my lab to make ozone. I'm sure that doing this will cause a chemical air pollution problem in my room, even if it has killed the viruses and bacteria. And so there's a little bit of disagreement in the literature about this. There have been experiments where people put these lamps into a closed reactor and they measure ozone formation. Maybe they introduce volatile organic compounds which react with ozone to make secondary organic aerosol. And then they suggest don't use these things because it could cause an inadvertent indoor air quality problem. Well, what we've done in partnership with some experts on this technology from the medical school is to try this out in a real office condition rather than in a reactor in the laboratory, okay? So we have a small office. The thing that's different between an office and a reactor is that we have ventilation in the office, right? The surfaces, the carpet, the furniture, all of these are reactive sources for ozone to be taken up, and so therefore this is a part of the system which might be missing in a reactor. So we ran these experiments with a wide range of UV emission, which is more corresponding to realistic application, and then measured ozone in the room and outside for contrast, and then likewise particles. And in summary, if we used just one lamp for this small room, which is very consistent with the manufacturer's recommendations, we did not see significant change in ozone above the background. Of course, the ozone level drifts throughout the day because it goes the way that outdoor ozone goes. But the difference between inside this closed room and then in another part just outside, almost no difference. We didn't see much change in particle count, even if we introduced a source of volatile organic compounds by cleaning with a lemon kind of furniture polish. If we had 4 of these lamps, which would really be overkill for a small room, but it would be more consistent with the kind of intensity that was used in some of the experiments, then yeah, we saw maybe 10 ppb of ozone formed above background. So our conclusion is that this technology may be safe under low fluence and well-ventilated conditions, which might be typical for the application that's recommended. Okay, so in summary, I'll say that there's a possibility for co-benefits for reducing transmission of pathogens and improving indoor air quality in terms of pollutants. Just like outdoor air quality, a local perspective is very much needed when you're trying to answer questions and give advice on these topics or just plan for your own building. Even within the United States, there's an incredible diversity of buildings, but it's clear that advice for one country may not be portable to another, and you really need local data to answer these questions. Just like in outdoor air quality, it's very important to use data to support and motivate decision making, and it was actually very satisfying to do this on such a short time scale where we can say, okay, this is the intervention is needed. This is the room where it's needed. We could gather the data and support the decision much easier than we do sometimes with outdoor air quality. And of course, this data collection, again, an analogy to ambient air quality, it really supports communication with the community and kind of a collective attitude towards keeping the space healthy. So with that, thank you.
Hello, good morning everyone. I am Amita from the Aeron system. I have the question National Ambient Air Quality Standards have given the AQI calculation for the outdoor environment, but till date they have mentioned some breakpoints and we are taking the breakpoint for the AQI calculation. But National Ambient Air Quality Standards, they have not mentioned any breakpoints for the indoor air quality index. So how we can define that these are the standards and based on this is the right AQI for the indoor. Mostly indoor air quality monitors uses that breakpoints for the AQI calculation for the indoor environment, but it is wrong. We have to develop some new breakpoints for the AQI calculation for particularly in the indoor environment, like indoor wellness index are there. So
Are you
what do
asking a
think?
question? What is the question for me?
Means, what are the national ambient quality standards for the indoor environment? How you are defining that these are
Okay,
the...
it's not up to me to define, right? So it's actually a very fascinating legal question.
Yes.
I'm not sure how it works in India, but in US, it's actually not possible to regulate indoor air at this time. Okay, so it's regulated indirectly through a number of different pathways. For example, we have special laws to protect workers. Okay, so in a working environment, you can say that people should not be exposed to an unhealthy level of a certain pollutant. But because most indoor spaces are private spaces, various legal reasons, there's no indoor air quality standards per se that are possible to be enforced or anything like that. Of course, perhaps there should be, right? Because it's so important for public health, and you're right that this is a different space than the outdoor space, but simply, at least in the US, it doesn't exist. I imagine this is also the case in India.
Let's move on, and let's just keep these quick, short technical questions, if possible. One more thing, just housekeeping rules. When the bell is rung, that means you have 3 minutes to wrap up your talk.
Okay. Thank you, Fainil, for the wonderful presentation. Next up, we have Yash Kumar Shukla. He will be joining us online today. So Yash Kumar Shukla is the Principal Research Center Head at CARBS, and he's also been, his interests have been into the passive design cooling technologies, and he has been leading various team lead in the Asian Development Bank focused in the building resilient, energy efficient air conditioning systems. Today he will be telling us about enhancing indoor air quality through well-designed HVAC systems. So I welcome Yash Kumar Shukla, sir, online. Yeah. Can we have the system?
Okay, great.
You can
Thank you,
start.
sir.
Thank you.
Let's get started. First of all, I want to thank the inviting me to the talk. I want to also apologize to the participants and organizers that I couldn't join in person, although I had planned to be there. So my apologies for that. I also want to request Kunal and Dr. Subbu to let me know, maybe speak up for 3 minutes, because maybe I'm not sure online whether I'll be able to know the ring very well. So the talk today is focused on the aspects of, how my journey or interactions with ASHRAE as well as the Asian Development Bank work that focuses on disease resilient air conditioning systems. So I'll just show you through the examples of what we have gone through as a process together. So before I start, I want to kind of reiterate to this audience that it's very important for us to consider clean air as a basic requirement for human health and well-being. And it covers 3 important, sustainable development goals, and why we need to really focus on indoor air quality along with outdoor air quality. So what does indoor air quality mean? I think Professor Fay did a fantastic job of covering some of the aspects. I'll be brief on this, but it kind of focuses on the air quality within buildings or very adjacent to the buildings to maintain the health and comfort of building occupants. And why it's important to use this maintain in an inverted bracket is to ensure that it's still an evolving science. So there's no consensus definition of ideal indoor air quality to date for various of reasons. I think one of that mentioned by Professor Fay already in the earlier questions. But it currently focuses on a limitation of pollutant levels, particulate matter, carbon dioxide, total volatile organic compounds, SDVOCs as 3 most commonly used sources, and it sets a threshold or limit to what it should be maintained inside the space. And it has a very strong linkages with productivity and cognitive ability of the occupant. So a lot of research has happened in the domain to demonstrate that. So when we started, thinking about the indoor air quality in Indian context, in the global south in particular, we looked at various standards that are available in the domain, and ASHRAE leading in many of these standards, but there are other organizations like REWA, ISHRAE, and other WHO talking about indoor air qualities. And there are 5 essentially elements that came out very, very clearly in these standards. One is that we need to increase the ventilation rate. We need to have a better air distribution so the clean air actually is near the breathing zone of the occupants. We have to achieve clean air either through, filtrations or through a disinfectant technologies. And we, along with that, there is a strong relationship of temperature and relative humidity with the certain, viral index, as well as some of the other factors as comfort as well. And so this is what, a host of literature that exists in the domain, but this got challenged in the COVID scenario. As we all know, it became very, very challenging. And I think Professor Fay also mentioned that how do we first keep occupants safe, but also very importantly, have our air conditioning systems not really transmit the long-term transmission of the diseases across our buildings. So that became a very, very important area. And in reaction to that, ASHRAE, under a challenging guideline, came up with a standard 241 that looks at how can we control better infectious aerosols and especially from the HVAC point of view. And so I want to kind of highlight those three things that we have been researching on and in this context, and I have been implementing in a pilot projects with support of ADB, Asian Development Bank. But three elements that comes out distinctly here. One is a flexible ventilation system needs. So there is a need for a ventilation system that reacts to a situation and needs of occupants inside as well as what's happening outside. Outside being in, outdoor air quality changes over the year, but also it also needs to account for a need for a disease resilient. So you would see there should be a smart integration of controls in new air conditioning systems to talk about normal versus a resilience mode or resilient mode, where we actually change how we operate our building air conditioning system in reaction to what is happening outdoors as well as indoors. And reacting on that, there is also another term that has been floated as part of the 241 standard, and it's called equivalent clean airflow rates. I'll talk a little bit more about it, but it's important to understand that we have moved slowly we are moving away from ventilation rates requirement to a clean air requirements. There is a difference between the two as we can all relate in this. So what is, I'll talk a little bit briefly about each of these modes and talk about a pilot that this is being implemented. So what is a resilient mode? A resilient mode is a mode where we actually try to reduce the infectious aerosol exposure in the building plan. So we have a plan, we have an activity where whenever there is a risk is higher, there is an infection risk, then we switch from a normal mode to a resilient mode. And that can be decided by, the owners, occupants, or the public health officials giving an advice to everyone saying, this is a good time to actually switch into what we call in short IRMM mode. Why do you not want to have these higher ventilation rate and, all the time? Because there are a couple of reasons that we have been studying. One is that there is a huge increase in energy use and cost that is associated by bringing additional ventilation rate. And so you would need to be careful when to use it, and you need to be smart in making that decision. And they also vary a lot based on the applications. I think the schools and universities were talked about by Professor Fay, but that varies from hospitals, for example. You would want to run it more frequently than the other, versus in certain places, in single offices where you only have one or two occupants sitting there. And so that resilient mode is something that we highly encourage now to build into a new air conditioning system design. And coming to an equivalent clean airflow concept. So this is an airflow that is defined as a flow of pathogen-free air that is distributed in the breathing zone of occupants. So that's a definition that has been come up with. And it essentially combines the effect of ventilation and filtration as well as inactivation of the pathogen. So instead of having a different definition of, how much ventilation rates you need or air exchange rate you need, how much filtration you should have, internal filtration versus centralized filtration, and a different technologies that can inactivate the pathogens, you can actually think about combining them, saying, okay, what's the resultant? What is the performance that we are looking for? And focus on an equivalent clean airflow as a tool to do that. So to achieve this, we have been, working on a project or a live 3 case study buildings where we try to integrate all of these different aspects. One is a ventilation, the passive filtration, which would a mechanical filter media that can filter out the certain particle matters, active filtration techniques that are, UVGI, I think that Professor Fay mentioned. We also need to think about how the air movement in our buildings are, as well as operation and maintenance. And let me just walk you through, each 3 technologies that have been integrated. So we have actually looked at HEPA filters and different kinds of MERV filters so that can use as a predominant ways to remove the particulate filter. And for most buildings, that's pretty much suitable to operate. And for certain cases where hospitals, you would actually need to have a higher filtration systems, mechanical filtration systems like hospitals to actually achieve the indoor air quality thresholds. Then the second pathway of this is an air cleaning, where there are a host of now technologies which we call as an active filtration techniques that is being used to achieve these disinfectant or inactivation of the pathogens. Here again, there are relatively newer technologies like ionizers and photocatalytic oxidations and oxidants that are being evolving. They are in emerging technologies that can be used in achieving the indoor air quality. Finally, I think this is often very ignored domain, but very important in our opinion and our experience, is that how are you distributing air inside the space? Do we have the good clean air where the occupants are sitting? Often we have an overhead air conditioning system that mixes air and a part of fresh air comes inside the building. What would be an ideal scenario is to look at a different kinds of ventilation systems which can provide clean air where the occupants are and then extract it out from the other side. So there are some technologies or methods that are well known, underfloor air distribution method, displacement ventilation methods. So we have incorporated this in the design of 3 pilot buildings that are being implemented in Sri Lanka. Just to put this in the context, how this field of air, clean air has evolved is if you look at this graph, this is a graph from Standard 241 committee, where we have looked at different, building typology and what was the requirement of current standards, which is 62 and 170. What does the ASHRAE 241, which is, the newer standard in response to COVID came, and what is still, it's far away from a CDC, which is, a US department trying to reduce the infection and the disease spread through the air conditioning system recommends. So you can see that there is a variation in different applications and different scenarios that one needs to look at when we are starting to look at systems. In these 3 particular buildings that I've been talking about, we have actually defined 5 different parameters to look at. We have defined that there should be an equivalent clean airflow that should meet 241 standards. We have to have comfort as per a standard 55, and indoor air quality should meet the WHO guideline 2023. And then we also at the same time, there is to minimize the energy use penalty as well as the climatic impact of the air conditioning system. It's kind of a balancing the both that is being implemented right now. As part of this exercise, there is a period of 1 year of monitoring and verification that is happening as per the ISO protocol that is typically used in energy use, but we are also implementing the same methodology to see whether we can do a monitoring and verification of indoor air quality for these buildings in conjunction with the energy, so we can understand the energy use impacts along with the indoor air quality and productivity benefits in the building. So set of surveys are being conducted right now, which is starting, from we started gathering the building information, gathering the carbon, the centralized air conditioning installed, and design these air conditioning system with the technologies that I had mentioned, passive as well as active systems, with the increased ventilation grid mode, which can adjust based on the need of the outdoors, and the post-installation monitoring of comfort, occupant feedback, as well as the energy use is happening right now. And we are also looking at the microenvironment impact to understand the air distribution benefits of installing this system. So that's where the stage we are. Hopefully, in the next year, we would be able to share the data, as I think Dr. From, the West Bengal rightly mentioned, we have to put all the data in the public domain, and we would be happy to do that, to share the findings, especially in the context of Global South, and as these projects are happening in support with the government of Sri Lanka. So with that, I end my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions anyone has.
I open the floor for questions towards Dr. Yash Shukla, if there are any based on. Yeah, there are a few hand raises. Can you pass the mic, please?
Try to keep it short, 1 or 2 questions. Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Shukla. Thank you for the nice presentation. Looking forward to seeing the analysis for the 3 Sri Lankan buildings. My question to you is more research oriented, in the sense you mentioned about the WHO and ASHRAE standards being the benchmarking criterion. How do you think that suits to the situations in Sri Lanka? Because that's very similar to India, one thing. And also I would like you to share your comment on the fact that how to do such a thing when 70% of your buildings are naturally ventilated. Yeah, so these are the 2 points.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I am Shuchi, and I finished my PhD from Indian Institute of Science. I was working with Professor Monto, so I've been following your work. So, these are the 2 queries I have. If you could kindly share your comments. Thank you.
Those are great points. I think Professor Fay also mentioned there needs to be contextual studies that needs to happen to understand the indoor air quality needs. Few of my colleagues here in the panel, I think would talk about their experiences. I think Ronak doing the monitoring. I think also Guru can talk about Infosys experience. But my experience is that we are still learning 2 aspects. One is how it affects the health and productivity of occupants, which becomes very, very important. Right now, frankly, we are limited by use of what is international protocols are available because of the lack of research and the data. I think that has been emphasized enough by my previous speakers, that could help us contextualize a bit more. So that's the benchmark. Although there are some universal aspects on the health that we can definitely take on in terms of the strategy, what kind of filtration to be used, what kind of UV systems to be used, what kind of ventilation rates can be suitable when the outdoor air qualities are poor, that needs to be studied in Indian context. So I know it's a generic answer to your question, but it needs to be contextualized with more data. The second point that you raised about, if I can, ask you to repeat that, or the person, Kunal, to repeat that question, please.
Yeah, so the second query I had was that these standards, benchmarking standards, are for air-conditioned buildings. We mostly, 70% of the times in India, if I talk about, operate in mixed mode or natural ventilation. So are there some comments you have about that? Because high time we look into the mass buildings we have. I've been working on that and I have struggled. So no protocols, no data. And
Absolutely. So I think there is a huge need to work on that. There's no doubt about it. There are methodologies that are defined. I think tracer gas is one of the methods that was defined by previous speakers to understand the, what are the air leakages, what are the ventilation rates that happen. We do need more data. There are, in my opinion, ways to achieve a similar indoor air quality with mixed mode buildings as well. It just needs to be studied better so we can actually document and provide how to achieve it. Our experiences in the laboratory studies and the field studies is that you have ways where you can bring in either the portable filtrations or a certain filtration where you can maintain a good balance of ventilation rates and filtrations to achieve the desired indoor air quality. But we need a lot more data to actually contextualize and provide a solid evidence to put it in the domain.
Thank you, Yashkumar ji, for the detailed answer. We'll move forward, save your questions for later common discussion on the panel discussion. So the next speaker for today is Guru Prakash Shastri. He has been the sustainable leader for 19 years. He's been in Infosys leading this building design actions for past 15 years. And they have been done a very great job towards bringing down the air quality, increasing productivity. And that's what we are here to hear from him today. So the topic for his is health, productivity, comfort and energy. I welcome Guru Prakash. Thank you.
Thanks, Kunal. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity, Subbu and the CSTEP team. So we heard a lot from all the researchers about why it's important to have good air quality. I'll give you a very clear business angle to it. If you look at the total operating costs of a building, business cost for a building, 90% of it is staff cost. It's 1% which is the energy cost, and 10% is about the rental costs. And if you are owner-occupied building like Infosys, most of our buildings we occupy, we own them. So 99% of the costs, operating costs, is actually the staff costs. So it's all the more important for us to maintain good health so that the staff is productive and therefore the business is good. And how do we do that? Is by maintaining good indoor environmental quality, what we call as, there are certain parameters that we measure very accurately in all our buildings. These are some of them: temperature, RH, CO2, PM2.5, and of course the other parameters like how much natural light, how much views each of the person has, because these are all the kind of experience which is very important for people to sit and work comfortably. And believe me, it makes a very big difference to have a bright, nice, comfortable space for the employees. Some of the initiatives that we have done towards improving the comfort, improving efficiency at the same time. One of them is radiant cooling. Radiant cooling is a cooling where you use both radiation and convection to good effect to achieve cooling in the space. It's very efficient because you supply cold water at 16 degrees right to the office floors instead of 7 degrees, which is done in the conventional air conditioning system. And the fresh air is 100% fresh air system because most of the cooling is done by the radiant surface. We don't have any recirculation of air in this case. So which means you have a very, very healthy system, 100% fresh air all the time. So this helped us a lot when we were getting our employees back after the COVID. So this gave a lot of confidence to the employees, saying, the chances of transmission of infection is so much lower in radiant cooled buildings compared to a conventional building, where 80% of your air is recirculated back into the space. So radiant cooling helped us a lot in addressing that issue, and also it's at least 30% more efficient than conventional air conditioning system. So today we have more than 5 million square feet of radiant cooling across our campuses in India in different locations. And it also provides a higher thermal comfort because the operative temperature is lower in a radiant cooled space. It's just like entering a cave. So where you feel much cooler when you enter a cave because all the surface around you is at a lower temperature. So that's what happens in a radiant cooling. The other thing is naturally ventilated food courts. Most of our food courts, in fact, all of our food courts in Bangalore, Mysore, Hyderabad, Pune, all these locations are naturally ventilated. They're all open. We do have some bird mesh or something to avoid birds coming in. They don't mostly. But yeah, this has provided very, very comfortable space for the employees. In fact, all the employees love to sit in these food courts, these open food courts. And as Fay was mentioning, this is local perspective or local adaptation. It's very, very important. And in fact, when we tried this for Pune some 15 years ago, 2 food courts already in Pune were air conditioned. And when I presented saying only so many hours, only about 15 hours is beyond the comfort range defined by the National Building Code, with some kind of fans and ceiling fans, we should be able to manage it. I mean, 26, 27 degrees for half an hour for somebody to sit and eat, why should it be a problem? Everybody doesn't have AC in their homes in these cities. So when that when that was decided and when we did this as open food courts, it was very welcome by the occupants, by the employees. Nobody has ever complained on any of these food courts being uncomfortable to sit. So it's very important to have the local adaptation and also push the thermal comfort to the specific function of that space. For food courts, especially where you spend 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour at the most, why would you need a temperature of 24 degrees and then recirculation of air and things like that? It's so much better to have it open. The other thing is, yes, when COVID happened, everything, all the buildings shut down. Then we had to come back to office slowly. And these are all the standards available, right? ASHRAE 62.1, then better than that is LEED, 30% higher, fresh air. Then came the WHO guideline, which is about 21 CFM per person of fresh air. So we wanted to make sure that our employees have a very high comfort, very high confidence when they come back to the office. So we exceeded the WHO guideline and said that we will design all our buildings for 22 CFM per square foot per person, 22 CFM per person of fresh air. So these are all the regular air-conditioned buildings, not the radiant ones. And of course, you may think there is a penalty on the energy when we get in more fresh air. Of course there is, but this can be optimized by good control mechanism in your air conditioning system so that you don't have cold pockets and hot pockets in the space. So this was deployed across, we did retrofits of more than 26 million square feet during the 21-22 period to make sure all our buildings have very high level of fresh air. These are some of the monitoring that we do. I don't know if you're able to see these numbers. That's the indoor environmental index that we monitor. We want to make sure that that's at 100% all the time. So all the essential parameters of indoor, like temperature, RH, CO2, PM 2.5 levels, everything is maintained. And that's one of the heat maps of a floor. And that's the AHU. We have, of course, very accurate controls on our air handling system. We have sensors telling us when the filters are dirty so that it can be cleaned and we can make sure the air quality is maintained. So this led to finally defining our own design principles for the new workplace. And as you can see, health and wellness is an important aspect for us while designing a workplace. So this can be in terms of the materials that we select, low VOC materials, low emission materials, and the kind of mechanical systems that we design, to the kind of designs that we do for our buildings, making sure that we have an open floor plan, everybody has views of the outside, and so on. So this makes a very big difference in making sure employees are very highly productive and they feel comfortable about the space. And of course, the other aspect is we do have a lot of greenery. We plant so many trees in our campuses that the air quality is naturally extremely good in most of our campuses. The CO2 levels are less than half of what you find in the city, in the central business district area. We also did a couple of studies with research teams, one from University of Braunschweig, way back in 2010, when we did the first radiant cooling system to assess what was the perception of comfort, perception of experience of people sitting in radiant cooled versus natural versus conventional air conditioned building. There's a very clear preference for radiant cooling space. The second is we commissioned a study from Center for Built Environment, UC Berkeley, and this study had about 20,000 employees, who were sent these surveys, indoor comfort survey, and more than 1,000 of them responded, and it was very clear that people, really wished for open floor plans, fresh offices, the comfort, something which is flexible, adjustable. So that's one of the reasons we also provide ceiling fans in our offices, in addition to the air conditioning. So after 6 o'clock, when the air conditioning is switched off, if anybody wants to still work, they can switch on the ceiling fans for some additional comfort. And some people prefer airflow across their faces. They don't feel comfortable until they feel the air. So for those people, they can switch on the ceiling fans. So these are some of the interventions that that have come up very clearly from these studies. And of course, we would love to have establish correlation between productivity and indoor air quality, which I think is clearly lacking today in terms of data. And we having more than 300,000 employees today, more than 50 million square feet of space, I think it's a good opportunity for us to, do some research on this area and work out some kind of a correlation to establish a very clear fact that we are all discussing today. Thank you.
Any questions from the audience? A quick question. We can take one question at this point.
Hello everyone, I am Shreyata. I am pursuing PhD from Indian Institute of Science. My question to you, sir, is that you said that you have indoor environmental index. So I would like to ask you, how did you define this indoor environmental index? Because it has various other parameters of acoustics and visual comfort which was not covered. So your take on that?
Yeah. So right now it's a fairly easy index. It is primarily based on temperature, RH, and CO2 level. These are the three parameters that we look at for indoor environmental index. If these three are in the range that we have defined, then the index is met. It's considered as the comfort criteria or the air quality is met in those areas. It's a fairly simple range that we have defined. Is there another question? You want to take that? Yeah? We have time for that?
Hello.
Okay.
Just a quick one. So myself, Brito, I'm co-founder of AirView. We are manufacturing indoor air quality monitors. So just a minute of congratulations to you, because when I Google search top ESG companies in India, Infosys stands first. And you have a detailed ESG report for which like the whole community congratulates you. So my question to you is, what are the criteria do you consider, of course, considering the air quality monitors while purchase, or are there any standards do you look at in the monitor before purchasing or installing in your premises? Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't get that. Before purchasing, what is that?
Yeah. What are the standards or the minimum criterias do you look into the air quality monitors while you purchase, before you make any purchasing decisions?
You mean the air quality sensors, the field devices?
Yes, correct.
We have a accuracy range that is defined for each of these sensors. For example, our TRH CO2 is a combo sensor. It's from Vaisala, and it's one of the most accurate that you can find in the market today. Similarly, we have Greystone giving us some of these sensors. PM 2.5, I think, is from Greystone. And this also has an accuracy level of plus or minus 10 microgram per cubic meter, if I'm not wrong. So it's the accuracy and the calibration and the guarantee that they give for 5 years. We have a 5-year guarantee for each of the field devices that we purchase because we are very, very particular about the data and the accuracy of data that we have, whether it is any of the environmental parameters or the energy parameters. Yep.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next talk, and we'll have more time for discussion at the end.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Guru Prakash, sir, for the amazing presentation and answers. Moving towards the fourth speaker, Rohan Sutaria. He's the founder and CEO of the startup called as Respire Living Sciences. He's one of the first ever low quality sensor network across. He's one of the researchers doing that. And his company does IoT and database power technologies for urban and rural deployments. They are the first scientifically calibrated low-cost sensor-based network. So today we are going to see their ground realities which they are bringing from Pune, called as for indoor air quality and thermal. I do welcome Rohan sir for the presentation.
Thank you, Kunal, and thanks Subbu and the CSTEP and the organizers for inviting us here. Just a correction, we make low-cost sensors, not low-quality sensors. So just adding to that. But today's discussion, honestly, is our experiences in working in the indoor air quality space. As Faye mentioned earlier, 80% of our time we are spending indoors, and we've been doing outdoor air quality monitoring since 2015, and we realized soon enough that indoor air quality is where most of the impact is happening. So we've been this session we are essentially going to share our experiences of for the past year. We've been working with an MNC in Pune, where they had a mandate from their German headquarters to monitor air quality, and that's how the whole engagement initiated. And it is an IGBC certified building. So there were some revelations for us, because we are all believers that when something is certified, when something is compliant, it's meeting all the necessary objectives. So one of the big findings, I'm not from the indoor, from the built environment space per se, but just to give you a sense, the building we were working with, so we essentially monitored PM 2.5, CO2, TVOCs, temperature and RH in these buildings. Interestingly, what we found is that the guidelines, the certification, the IGBC certification said that it needed outdoor air supply in the building, and the building had it in one part of it, in the atrium section. And interestingly, where all the employees were sitting, actually there was no outdoor air supply. So one of the key early learnings we got is that, depending on certifications to identify if it meets the requirements is not adequate. The continuous or real-time monitoring brought out a fair number of insights for us. The picture you see on the top right actually is the air supply systems, which are essentially going into the central visitor area of the building. But where the employees sit over here, there was actually no, so there are 80 employees sitting in the working area, and there was no outdoor air supply, which essentially came across from the monitoring that was done initially. Interestingly, we also measured ACHs, and the recommended ACH as per the National Building Code in India is around 10 actually, and, 6, the minimum ACH. What we found is that most of the times the building actually in July in the monsoon months had about 2.4, and it peaked in the summer months when the air conditioning was running at its peak, which was at about 4.2 ACH. So it was still not meeting the required standards on the real-time basis. Some of the temperature and humidity levels, primarily to understand the thermal comfort aspects of this, was that it did meet the required standards. Both temperature and humidity were well within the thermal comfort range that the building code prescribed. But interestingly, the PM 2.5 is where things became a little bit troublesome. The building code, and I think in the earlier, there was a question about what is the standard. For outdoor, we know that under 30 is what is prescribed to be good. The National Building Code and ICAS+ in India says under 15 micrograms throughout the year is what you need to maintain. The building was maintaining it for a good amount of time till September. Come October, November, and in December, it started hitting levels of about 100. So this was a area of concern, and this is where, a deeper engagement was going on. The earlier speakers from Infosys mentioned about productivity, and there is a direct correlation with CO2 levels. We found that actually the building had acceptable CO2 levels, which was around 400, only for 27% of the whole year. The rest of that essentially means that 70% of the time this corporate building was struggling to maintain the necessary CO2 levels. It was hitting very poor and severe levels for about 15 to 20% of the entire period. This is where actually the interventions become important. Both PM 2.5 and CO2 in winter months was becoming a challenge to keep on par. Of course, the next question is, there is all this data, what do we do with it? The real-time monitoring allowed us to understand, which time periods the issues were. The solution came, and Dr. Yash Shukla, I should highlight over here actually, most of this work has been done with researchers from CABS. So this work actually has been collaborated with his team in CEPT. The demand control ventilation aspects have been proposed. They are in the process of getting implemented, but we of course don't have results from it. What our essential finding is that the problem, as was identified from PM 2.5 and CO2 levels, essentially is going to be, it translates to managing your ACH. So if you can manage your ACH, and you need to do it intelligently, running it all the time. I'll highlight here actually some numbers. I recently was reading about air conditioning in India because, and folks from CEW are over here, they've recently published a lot on air conditioning usage. India is the fastest growing market for air conditioning, largely to fix your thermal comfort and IAQ situation. 12 to 15 million units of air conditioning is being bought in India every year. 60% is what the market is growing at. What it translates to is actually just the electricity consumption by the ACE segment in India is going to surpass the entire African continent's energy usage. So this particular IAQ thermal comfort becomes even more relevant because it's an energy guzzler. It's guzzling as much as the entire continent of Africa. So fixing it becomes relevant. The answer for fixing ACH is going to come through demand control ventilation, where we want higher ACHs at lower PM 2.5 things. So how do we move below 15? How do we have ACH above 6? It's going to come through, the goal over here, once the data kicks in, is how do we maximize ACH? And as the Infosys panel member said, we obviously want to increase occupancy. We don't want empty rooms. So maximize ACH, maximize occupancy, minimize PM 2.5, minimize your energy and filtration cost. So it really kind of boils down to a parametric problem we are working on. The corollary to implementing solutions is that it's going to come at a cost. And the summer months are going to bear the brunt of the cost. once you kick in your demand control ventilation, 30% extra energy costs are going to kick in. How do you manage that? And essentially, if you kick in your demand control, pretty much 3,072 hours, if you do it right, you can actually, this is what we've estimated for the building we are working with, is that we can just manage to have the adequate ACH and PM by running a mixed mode demand control ventilation for 960 hours. This is going to happen through having insights about the outdoor conditions, and that's where I think researchers, scientists need to step in, because staying confined within your building is not going to give you all the necessary insights. The building is it's functioning in the context of its climate, outdoor climate, and understanding which months, what is happening outside, both from temperature, CO2, and PM levels, will help you reduce that 30% energy cost to substantially lower levels. So finally, coming to solutions, there has been a solution that has been proposed to the building. They are in the process of looking to implement it. It is going to primarily involve increasing ventilation rates, reducing allergens through filtration, and ultimately keeping a handle on the cost, because you don't want to shoot up the costs. The solutions that we've estimated, with complete air circulation, you will have a particular amount of energy consumption for 1 year, about 40 kilowatts per the band. But if you do demand control, of course, that number will go up. It will inch nearly towards the 50 kilowatt hours. But doing it right can actually lower it significantly. So it is important to make sure that the right levels are done. So finally, coming down to what is the takeaways, we are looking to optimize indoor air quality by adjusting ventilation based on real-time indoor and outdoor data. The key parameters, so this was actually in a classroom that we've also done. Okay, I think it's moving faster than I'm moving it. But in any case, so we do have a real-time energy dashboard combined with, I think it's moving actually, I don't know. The slides are moving on their own. Okay, I don't know, maybe they're moving on their own. Okay, I guess that's, are they moving on their own? Okay, all right. In any case, I think the key message here is that, the real-time data combined with insights and actions is going to help us keep track of energy consumption and air quality. So these integrated solutions, we make some of this, a lot of this is available. Ultimately, communicating air quality standards, honestly, Subbu, we should have had a board here telling us what our air quality is. It was fairly doable. And so I think that's the key messages from, what our experience. This was a year-long engagement we've done. I'm going to leave with some questions, for a longer conversation, but some of you may have answers to when we close all windows, and should we keep all our, right now we actually don't have any windows here, but when the air conditioner is on, all the windows and doors, should they be kept closed? What is worse, outdoor air quality or indoor? Does installing an HVAC system ensure healthy indoor air? And will outdoor air intake increase the energy consumption of an air conditioner? So these are some of the questions we kind of work with in understanding. But that's all from our work. That's pretty much all I have.
Hi, this is Satish. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Columbia. So you were showing data for a PM 2.5 inside the building. Did you, by any chance, figure out what the ambient air quality was? Because you're pulling air from the outside. So did you find any association? Did you first measure ambient air quality or ambient PM 2.5, and did you find any association, if at all you did?
So we have outdoor air quality monitors in this building. But actually, where the indoor air quality monitors were being used, they didn't have any air circulation from outdoors. So like I said, where the people were working, they didn't have fresh air, outdoor air supply coming in. It was actually all focused on the common areas where visitors used to sit. So that got them the certification, but that didn't give them any fresh air. So to answer your question, yes, we have the data. There is no real correlation because the indoor air was primarily circulating on its own. So,
Ranak.
Thank you so much, Rohan, for the presentation and questions. Next speaker for the discussion panel is Samir Patel. Samir Patel is the Assistant Professor at Department of Civil Engineering and Department of Chemical Engineering jointly at IIT Gandhinagar. His research group, Energy, Environment and Exposure Laboratory at IIT Gandhinagar, investigates nexus between energy, environment and human health. That's exactly the presentation of his, to tell the trade-off between indoor air quality, energy and thermal comfort. I welcome Samir sir for the presentation.
Okay, thank you Kunal for the introduction, and thank you for all the panelists for setting the context for this talk too, so I'll have to spend less time talking about the introduction. So I think we can, I would first like to start with acknowledgement. So Alok and Nishay are the one who did most of the work which I'm going to present today. Alok is here in this room. And we do a lot of modeling work before field deployment. So we need data for that. And that came out from a test house at UT Austin, which I collected during my postdoc working with Professor Marina Vance and Professor Attila Novoselek. So I think the last talk was all about buildings and energy intensive. So if you look at this at a global level, what is happening is that almost 40% of the total energy just goes to construction and operation of building, and this is global average. So buildings are very, very energy intensive, and any improvement we can bring to building sectors can have a very serious positive consequences for our transition to low carbon goals. So now, if you look at this chart, which is showing you per capita electricity consumption for different countries, and if you look at India, this is just 1.18, almost 3 times lower than world average, and almost 4 times lower than China. Now, this is interesting, and our goal is to transition from developing nation to developed nation. And as we do that, our per capita electricity consumption is gonna multiply by a big factor. And a lot of that energy, increase in energy, is gonna come from buildings. So as Ronak was saying that, right, we are the leader in, or the fastest growing market for air conditioning. And now it's not just, so in India, air conditioning is usually related with cooling. But now every big manufacturer has at least one model out there which is dual mode. That means you can use the same model in winters to heat, right? And those models are getting popular. So we are not talking about comfort, thermal comfort just in terms of cooling, but also heating, right? So a big chunk of our nation's energy demand in the future is gonna come from buildings. Now, if we want to get to net zero carbon building stock by 2050, this is what the International Energy Agency estimates, that our building sector emissions need to fall by 6% per year. But where do we stand? It's other way around. So if you look at increase in building energy consumption for different countries, everyone is on a increasing path, and India is the leader. And this is just the energy consumption. If you look at how fast we are building, India is right now the global leader for constructing buildings. And we are gonna be at the top list for at least next 2 to 3 decades. And even after that, by the end of 2040, it is projected that in India, per capita energy consumption related to building is going to be among the lowest. That means our growth is not yet done. We are just going to keep increasing our energy consumption. So in short, the point I wanted to make is that building sector will be among the leading constituents of energy consumption portfolio of India and other developing nations. Now, where is the problem? Is that our carbon intensity is still high for the electricity we produced. Almost, this is the latest data, and more than half of the electricity is coming from coal. Now, moving on to indoor air quality, a lot has been already said, is that even though we just keep talking about most of the focus is on ambient air quality, many of us, especially in urban India, spend most of our time indoors. So that means the air we inhale indoors dominates our cumulative personal exposure. But it should also be acknowledged that a lot of pollutants which are present in indoor environment are coming from outdoor. So we also include those phenomena in our modeling. So from operational energy perspective, what happens is that from regulatory perspective, from building rating perspective, for example, IGBC, LEEDs, GRIHA, all of them are focusing mainly on energy consumption of building. Most of the weightage is given on energy consumption of buildings when they are rating buildings. But the primary function of building is to give us a healthy and safe environment and to safeguard us from outer elements in terms of extreme weather. And also, this is especially true for India, from outdoor air pollution, which is going to be there for at least next 1-2 decades, and it might get worse before it starts improving. But as already highlighted by multiple speakers before me, there is a trade-off between energy consumption of a building and thermal comfort and exposure to indoor air pollutants and pathogens. So these are some slides to set the context, is that we can have good indoor air quality, we can reduce our exposure to, let's say, particulate matter in this case, in this plot, but then that in case of air conditioning building and depending on how hot or cold it is outside, because we are pulling in fresh air, it's gonna have an energy penalty associated with that. So what we do in our research group is that we develop physics-based and machine learning models to optimize this interesting and complex trade-off between energy consumption, thermal comfort, and well-being of buildings occupants by dynamic control of HVAC system. So to do any kind of modeling, we need data to start with. So that data is coming from this test house. This is a 3-bedroom fabricated or manufactured test house located at UT Austin campus. And in 2018, we did very comprehensive indoor air quality measurements while doing a lot of indoor activities which we usually do in our daily life. So during all of the experiments, it was operated at a continuous air exchange flow rate equivalent to 0.5 air changes per hour. And it is already the overview of HomeChem studies published if someone is interested. And then the data which we are using from this study is mostly particulate matter data collected using a bunch of instruments so that we have the whole particle range, size range starting from 1 nanometer all the way up to 20 micrometer. And then those particulate matter data, PM data, has been comprehensively analyzed and published. And the data from these 2 papers here are feeding to our models. So first what we did is that we did the purely physics-based modeling, and we created a digital twin of the test house. So we took the test house characteristics, we feed in the emission rate data, we have characterized that test house to know the PM deposition rates, and all those parameters which are required to model the ultimate fate of particulate matter in indoor environments. And then we also developed a physics-based model to replicate the HVAC system of the test house and also the dedicated ventilation system, which was responsible for pulling in fresh air inside the house. And then in addition to that, the house is not insulated, so there's gonna be indoor to heat transfer depending on its hot or cold outside. And then ultimately, the objective is that what if we start operating the HVAC on demand, as Ronak was signaling to, depending on the cost function. So my cost function is that I want to reduce exposure to PM 2.5 while maintaining thermal comfort and also trying to minimize the energy penalty associated with that. So the results you're seeing here are simulation results. So the data on, by the way, these two plots are corresponding to two different experimental days. So the one on the left is low emission day where the highest concentration is around 75 micrograms per meter cube. And the one on the right, it was very intensive cooking day where the concentration went as high as 300 micrograms per meter cube. The data in black is the real experimental data collected from instrument. And then the data in red is the on-demand optimization or operation of HVAC system depending on the indoor concentration without a filter in air handling unit. And the data in blue is with HU unit. And you can see that with optimization, we can reduce personal exposure. What I'm not showing you here is the associated energy penalty. Yes, there was energy penalty because it was done in summer. It was hot outside. You have to condition that air which you are pulling from outside. And this is about the fate of particulate matter, how they are leaving the indoor air volume. So the first row, again, is just for the low cooking intensity experiment, and the bottom row is for high intensity cooking day. And the first column here is the benchmark data, and you can see that in both days, the deposition to indoor surfaces was the major sink for particulate matter. And then the other fraction, which is shown in red, was exfiltration. That means it got out of the house through flushing or bringing in indoor, outdoor fresh air to indoor volume. And then the second column here is the optimization without any filter in the AHU. And you can see that as soon as you do the indoor to outdoor ventilation rate increases to reduce our personal exposure, and that's why the fraction shown in red is going up. But the more the red color is there, the more will be the energy penalty because you are bringing in outdoor air. And then the third column is that as soon as you introduce a filter in AHU, which is responsible for indoor circulation, that means you can just, so technically your AHU becomes a portable air purifier, but in much bigger size. And in that case, the optimization model recognizes that, and the most of the capturing is now being done by the filter because it has lower penalty, energy penalty associated with it. And this work has been recently published. Now, moving on, the problem with physics-based modeling is that you need to know your indoor volume or the house you are dealing with or the building you are dealing with really well. You have to characterize a lot of things in that building. As Faye mentioned that you have to do those tracer tests to characterize air exchange rate. You also have to do decay tests to characterize deposition rate. And if we want a system which can be deployed in any building, it has to be done easily without requiring so much of building specific data, because you cannot actually go on field and do these kind of tests for each and every building. And that's where this machine learning comes into the picture. So what we did is that we took the same data set, same digital twin of the house, and we did reinforcement learning, where this model is learning by itself. It takes random action, and after each action, it is learning what is the effect on indoor air quality. And if you look at this plot, the black is again experimental, the red is physics-based optimization result, and the blue color is our machine learning optimization, which does not require any building-specific data. And this is after decent amount of training. You can see that both optimization, physics-based and machine learning-based, are doing good. There is an energy penalty associated with it because in both of these simulations, what was done is that the set temperature of the thermostat was 25 degrees Celsius. But if we are ready to compromise with that a little bit, you can see that if we just move our set point temperature from 25 to 25.5, just 0.5 degrees Celsius, we can actually reduce personal exposure while also saving some energy. So the next step is also to have a dynamic control of indoor temperature settings to make sure that thermal comfort is there. This is the testbed deployment, which is ongoing right now. So we have an edge device where the model is there, and it takes inputs from low-cost sensors, which are both indoor and outdoors, and then the model decides how our dedicated ventilation system should operate. So we have done real field deployment, and when we introduce indoor PM sources, it takes action. As you can see, that screen PM went up in blue, air exchange rate also went up. So yeah, with that, I think I can end. First 2 points I'm not going to say. The third point is interesting, which I did not say, is that right now the green building rating systems do not give much weightage to indoor air quality. And as I showed, if you want to improve indoor air quality, there might be an energy penalty associated with it. What does that mean? That these green building rating systems might come in and lower your star rating because now you are consuming more energy. So indirectly, you can say that it might be de-incentivizing good indoor air quality. So we surely want to improve our building rating systems to incentivize indoor air quality. So with that, thank you for your attention. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Samir. Quick question for Samir? One quick question.
One quick question.
It has to be short.
Hello, hi. This is for the general panel, in fact. My name is Mahesh. I'm co-founder of Atma Prana Vayu. So we are working in the space of bio-air purification for indoor and outdoor. So is there any solution as of now that's been implemented in corporate buildings or CSR activity where they are using any bio kind of solutions for decreasing the carbon or anything towards carbon sequestration and reducing the other pollutant levels, like toxic gases I'm talking about mainly?
Good question. So you're talking about gaseous species, if I'm not wrong, right?
That is correct, sir.
Yeah. I'm not aware of any. There might be out there, but yeah, I'm not sure of any such field implementation.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Samir. So I am going to invoke my moderator privileges, and I have a set of questions that I do want to ask for all the panelists. And then if you have time, we'll move to audience questions. So one is, there's been really interesting cross-section where Infosys is having passive cooling and 100% fresh air. Remind me again, the office is like outside Bangalore? You mentioned that the office is a little bit outside of Bangalore. You shifted Electronic City, right? Whereas, Ranak, you had this data showing that indoor air quality was quite poor in one of the buildings in some of the non-monsoon seasons. So where was that building? Inside the city? In this heart of the city?
Yeah, pretty center.
Okay. So, is this like a trade-off? Like, if people want to reduce energy consumption and provide reasonably fresh air to their employees, would you say that offices had to move outside of the city? And Guru Prakash, go ahead.
Yeah, I wish I could say that, but but I don't think we have the we have the liberty to do that. So we also do have offices which are in the city. What I feel is the important thing is to design your system in a very efficient way so that things can ramp down, ramp up according to the needs of the space. That's the most important aspect to maintain energy efficiency. The indoor air quality aspect, it should be non-compromisable. The minimum fresh air quantities have to always be maintained. So it should never be looked at a trade-off between the two. The trade-off can happen only if the systems are ramping down, you have the controls in the systems. Take this hotel, for example. You ask the operators, what's the best way you can reduce the energy consumption? They say, close the fresh air dampers. That's typically what happens. But that's a very wrong way of looking at it.
Okay.
You have the right controls, you have variable speed, everything in the HVAC systems, and you have the right filtration. I think that's essential to have your system efficient as well as comfortable, healthy.
Fair enough. And I mean, you were doing this from like the last over 10 years, right? And I'm pretty sure, I think Yash is, also, I don't know if he's online, but I don't think ASHRAE or any other Indian standards body has such a standard, right? I mean, Infosys did this in leadership on your own. So the question is, what would it take to, for other companies to do something similar? Or do you think there's a need to mandate such standards? I mean, following best practices of companies like Infosys, for example.
No, there are standards actually, Subbu. The ASHRAE standard specifies what is the minimum fresh air. Of course, it's not a mandate. It's not a mandatory standard. It's a reference standard for designing your system. So that's something that that we follow very specifically. There is a standard that is developed, because of various research that has gone into it, and there's a background to it. And we feel that this is the right standard to follow, and then we go beyond the standard when the need be.
Right. I mean, I was comparing because you went with the WHO one, which is like almost double the one of the ASHRAE standards. And
yeah. So as I said, the employee costs in any building is far more than energy or anything else, any other operating cost. And when once we realize that, then it's a no-brainer. It becomes a very simple thing to understand where you want to put your effort and your money.
Right.
Have you seen the return on investment?
Yeah.
My question was, have they quantified the return on investment for this ambitious policy?
We believe so.
So
there is no correlation as such, but it's in the hope that we provide the best indoor air quality for the employees, best experience for the employees, so that they feel comfortable. They don't fear that if I go to office I'll catch some infection or something. So that's the kind of mindset that we had doing this.
But you haven't seen any reductions in absenteeism or increased productivity, but people are happy to come back to the office and work.
Yeah. People are very happy to come back to offices in such a case.
Great.
They feel more confident.
Right. Ronak, you had something to add?
So your point about moving the building outside the city limits, and there is a study where the employee satisfaction of working in a company happens when the commute is less than 15 minutes. So, and in Bangalore, I think is a classic case, because everybody is frustrated. But I think there is a published study which says that people who have less than 10 minutes or maximum 10 to 15 minutes of commute to their office are the most happy when they reach the office. Just as a corollary to your standards question, so we were in WeWork. I mean, I can take a name of a brand, I guess, but we used to be in a co-working WeWork for about a year and a half. And for the entire year, the levels there were less than 2 to 3 micrograms. So initially when we moved in, our monitors kept reporting 0, and we thought they are not working. So we escalated the issue to to our electronics team, and finally we realized actually there was 0 particulate matter for pretty much month on month. So I think there are buildings who are getting it right. We ultimately continued there for over a year and a half, mainly because of indoor air quality. They were not displaying it, but honestly, I think more than standards, if somebody just put a board here saying your PM 2.5 is 0 or 2, I will spend more time in that office building versus somewhere where it's 35, 40. So just displaying the real data versus having a platinum, certificate, probably.
Yeah, one thing to add, when Dr. Rudra was talking about the West Bengal thing, we have a campus in Kolkata that we recently started operations in a small way, in Rajarhat, if you're aware. So when he was speaking, I was just looking up what is the PM levels there. It's like 15. It's a little out of the city. Rajarhat is in the New Town area, which is quite out of the city. So it's like 15, 2.5.
All right. Nice. So, while thinking about thermal comfort, this room has been cold for a while, I think. But Faye, So I mean, all the work that you've done and recording ventilation rates and kind of correlate that with transmission risk reduction. I mean, is there a move for the recommendations are higher than existing standards? So is there a move to actually incorporate that into building codes going forward, or more improved LEED or other sort of certification standards?
I think this question is a little bit above my pay grade. I think Yash might be in a better position to answer it. But I think that more work needs to be done to show the benefit of these activities, right? Like, I think that once we see that, we are saving money, in fact, by making the environment better, and it's not just a cost, right? Then I think that can help motivate things a lot, and that would also motivate changes in policy.
Right, great. I think this is going back to Guru Prakash's point about wanting to do a study on that. But to bring in Yash, I mean, so do you want to follow up on that? I mean, in terms of, stricter standards from ASHRAE or Indian bodies, ISHRAE, for example.
So I think we'll have to keep in mind, I think what Faye mentioned earlier, that regulating indoor air quality is always the challenging legal aspects that I think would be very difficult for anybody to regulate. What we have seen though, when we look at the standards, for example, standard 241 from ASHRAE was a response from White House requiring a standard that can talk about infectious aerosols and how can we control through air conditioning systems. So there is an increasing recognition of need to look at indoor air quality. We have also recently seen that there is in Sri Lanka, there is an indoor air quality guidelines that their government has come up with. Bangladesh in their national building code has actually incorporated some of the particulate matter levels in their standards or in their building code rather. So there is an increasing need, acceptance, but I think we'll still have to frankly rely on, the early adopters like Infosys and who can actually drive the conversation. I think we are far away from defining the minimum standards that can be applicable everywhere. So that's kind of my thought there.
Sorry, took a minute. And what do you think it'll take? I mean, so if India does not have it, but Bangladesh is having it, right? And what would it take for us to actually, for India to move towards that, towards stricter standards?
So the newer version of national, sorry, somebody saying something or?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So the newer version of National Building Code, which is under revision, there is a group of people who are actually trying to get certain particulate matter levels as part of the code. So there is an effort going on in the domain to actually, and you can say enforcing, it's just still National Building Code is in a way a recommendation, right? I mean, in a way it's not still fully enforced. And so, but it kind of moves the needle in that direction, but it will take, frankly, a lot more awareness, a lot more scientific data, and a lot more policy will to actually get into the code, if I can say that.
Great, thank you. So Samir, to your point, I mean, I think I was thinking of other. I think in the US there is a software available that allows you to do building design to look at ventilation and air exchange rates. I forget what the name is, but is that something that you're thinking about? Because you indicated that traditional like CFD kind of models may be too difficult and may require a lot more effort to implement from building to building. But if any corporate or any building designer wanted to incorporate these sort of changes, would you be developing tools to help them do that?
Yeah. So right now, the long-term goal is that to have solutions, commercially available solutions, which could do that. You can retrofit old buildings, and the new building can start from scratch, right? They have liberty to do that. Right now, those options are not available. And even before that, it again also boils down to policies and regulations because it's not mandated. So companies like Infosys, they are doing it on their own because they recognize the importance of that. But in most of the cases, these things are not required or mandated. So it also becomes a sensitization issue, apart from technical issue. Do we have the technology to do that? And another thing is like, as Ronak said, is that we have these fancy certification for buildings, but how good or bad they are in terms of including indoor air quality and these kind of things should be debated and looked upon. Yeah.
All right, great, thanks. Faye, following up on your thing, so I mean, you reported a lot of academics around the US collaborated and provided that data, right? And I know at least while I was at Carnegie Mellon, I kept getting these emails that we are improving this, we are implementing these standards, like we are increasing ventilation rates. So did all your collaborators, all the institutions actually implement those changes, or did they face challenges in implementation that people could keep in mind, for example?
I think the experiences varied a lot across the country, and of course, even the locations where we were all working were very different politically as well, right? So some of the data I showed was from a university that was already reopened in August 2020. And so that's why the data were from an occupied classroom, right? Whereas the other studies were in empty places. So, I mean, I will say that having the data and, to the extent that we were having these conversations with building managers, it made everything just much easier on each side, right? They wanted to, or they needed to make these decisions, and it was more effective for them if they knew which rooms were the problem areas and where they didn't need to focus. And likewise, this is the change that we wanted as well. We wanted healthy rooms as well. So it was a win-win, I would say. But the shape of that conversation may have been different in different places.
And so continuing with you, Faye, I mean, for colleges in India, for example, and there's a lot of students in the audience, and some of them are working on indoor air quality. If they wanted to, examine their work, I mean, Samir can also chime in, but if they wanted to examine their air quality and implement certain changes, what recommendations would you have for them?
I think that first there needs to be a conversation with the people who are in a position to make decisions, and you have to build trust before you even start collecting data, right? It's not a fight, it's a conversation, right? And usually, like I said, there's a lot of opportunities for win-wins. So if you start from this position of saying, this is what we're doing, and this is why, and this is how it can help you, then it's just a matter of collecting the data and sharing it and helping them make decisions. But that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, so I concur with Faye, is like collecting data, like so that you have something to start a conversation with. And then I think I would also like to add one more angle. Sorry, I'm going a bit tangential, but I would add one more angle to this, that when we talk about indoor air quality, it's not just limited to buildings. It can apply to a lot of built environments, for example, vehicles. So now, what is happening is that, at least in India, we tend to operate our air conditioning in 100% recirculation mode. And the reason is that as soon as you go to indoor to outdoor mode, you will start smelling exhaust from the other vehicles. Now, my students sitting over there at the end, and we took a road trip recently for a field visit, and we took a CO2 sensor with us. And what we found out is that so there was 3, including driver 3 in the cabin, and within few hours, within 1 hour, the concentration went to 5,000 ppm CO2 concentration, and it went way higher than that. Our sensor saturated at 5,000. Now, if you know the effect of high concentration CO2 to your cognition ability, you will know that in Indian roads, that deterioration in cognition could be a death or life thing, if a situation comes to that. So in general, I think we also need to include all of those things in this conversation too. Yeah.
That's fantastic, because one of the questions our CSTEP HR manager actually asked me was, He lives about 2 hours away from the CSTEP office, and he comes to the office basically once a week, right? But he spends 4 hours a day in the car, and so his question was, if the air pollution is so bad, should I always put it in recirculation mode? And your thing is no, because that can very clearly lead to increased CO2, and in 2 hours, you'll probably reach really high dangerous levels. But you basically, that maybe calls for better air filtration in the car system. The one thing though, I mean, a lot of our talk so far, I mean, has been on PM 2.5 and maybe CO2. And being in Bangalore and like a lot of other Indian cities, transportation emissions can be pretty high. If you are on road, you're exposed to vehicular exhaust a lot, especially if you are near diesel trucks or diesel cars or whatever you have. And so, while we may have particulate filters in your cars, gaseous pollutants like nitrogen dioxide and carbon monoxide are not stopped by these filtration. So what would be the recommendation? Have you guys come across any filters for these gases, or what should people do? And by the way, while you're thinking about it, I mean, I wear my N95 mask whenever I'm in Bangalore traffic. So it's just in my room right now, but I'm like, I'm not breathing that stuff. But it still doesn't stop, NO2 and carbon monoxide and VOCs, right?
Dr. Bala, if I may come in after Dr.
Go ahead,
Samir.
please.
No, I'll go after Dr. Samir.
Okay.
Yeah, so you are right. Gases, there are some solutions available to capture these gases, but then they are expensive, and normally they will require more frequent replacement of the capture material, unlike PM filter, which need to be replaced, once a year or maybe twice a year, depending on how high is the dust loading in your environment. So yeah, if it becomes a choice between high CO or CO2, go on recirculation mode. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate the same challenge. I think few things we have learned over the last 7-8 years of research and some of the lab testing is that technologically there are solutions available. So we know that there are several filtration devices which can be put in the car, and there are few people who are really forward thinkers actually maintain a very good total volatile organic compounds, particulate matter, and carbon dioxide levels. So the balance of ventilation and filtrations. Now the question comes often is, how cost effective it is. That's where it ends up, and how scalable it is. And I think that's where a conversation needs to happen. I'll give you another example that we have monitored a typical residences, and I think this goes to Suchi's question from IISc, where in the residences we have monitored the carbon dioxide levels overnight, where 2 without any fresh air, and we have found that to be 2,500 ppms overnight without any filtration, without any ventilation rates. And we have our studies, which is still in the progress, these things take time, is that people feel lethargic when they wake up, when you have a when it's unventilated versus ventilation. Now, there is not sufficient evidence for us to correlate it strongly yet to be able to quantify it, but there is a reasonable amount of correlation to demonstrate that there is a technologically solution exists. Everybody has exhaust fans in the bathroom, there are filtrations that are available, but the implementation and scalability and cost effectiveness, these are the aspects that I think we need to work a lot more. So I just wanted to highlight that is a huge challenge in the domain right now.
So Subbu, I have a slightly different take. I think the question you asked needs a fundamental difference in solving that problem. Maybe we should look at the mode of transport as the first thing, because there is a big change happening there, and it's very important to shift to public transport as much as possible, and probably invest more research into technologies that that can have that can fast track hybrids or EVs or something, which are actually zero emission vehicles.
Right.
Metros, for example.
Yeah.
We are investing in metros. We have funded some of the metros through our foundation and all, metro stations. So we really believe that public transport is the way forward for cities in India, which are really bursting at their seams.
Yeah.
You know, we can't solve it any other ways.
Fair enough. I agree 100% with that. And on that note, I think we are well over time. And we please give a round of applause to our panelists. And hopefully most of you or all of you will stay for lunch, and you can have this conversation on. We have some gifts for you. Yash, we'll probably send you yours in the mail. Thank you for participating. I hope you're doing well. And
Thank you.
yeah, thank you all again for being such a great audience.